This one shift in perspective saved us so much time as a home builder. So the one aha moment that we had was during rough-in. And rough-in is a way of saying, when the project is just in framing and we have mechanical, electrical, plumbing, better known as MEPs, installed on the property. So that's all of the lighting, the rough-ins for the lighting, it's the rough-ins for the plumbing, and all the utility lines, the fire sprinklers, low voltage. There's a lot of mechanical equipment, so all of the HVAC runs, so all of your ducting. And so what we found was we wanted to move really quickly because we're holding these properties, it's expensive. We wanted to get through construction really quickly, so we moved fast. Now, our perspective has changed though, because what we found is it's always better, you've heard, it's always better to do it right the first time. Not necessarily that we're intending to do it wrong, but we're moving quickly and as a result, potentially not being as mindful of the details. And what we've found recently, especially in the last few years, is by taking that extra step, and that may even mean a little longer timeline for that scope, it ends up saving us quite a bit at the very end of the project because we're not going back and reopening up walls and adding things in. We're doing all of the due diligence, all of the design, all of the aesthetics, and we have the entire house, especially each and every room, designed, picked out, and laid out prior to construction, so that when we get into construction, we know exactly what we're doing, and we're not doing it on the fly. We're not adding a couple lights here and this and that, because what we found is when we move too quickly, we end up having to go back. And I think the reason why we hadn't always done it this way is because, again, we're moving quickly. We're thinking that we've got it under control. We think that we know exactly what we're doing, but instead we're spending a small amount of time in that scope and then moving on to many others. Instead, recognize the importance of the design, the electrical and the plumbing. I'll give you an example. With plumbing, if you're putting a wall-mounted fixture, without getting into the nuances of it, you're having to do the valve for that faucet, so where the water's spilling out into the sink on a vanity in a bathroom. If you're doing it on the wall, you have to work all the way back to figure out where it is in framing. You have to subtract the sink, the countertop, the vanity, how far off the ground it's going to be. There's a lot of facets that go into it. Spend the time. We went quickly because I wanted to have us continue on to the next scope. And instead, what we found is we had to go back. We had to fix it, or it wasn't exact. And if we just spent that little extra time right away at the beginning, it ended up saving us. We don't have to go back and do stuff. We don't have to adjust stuff. We don't have to open up walls when we're in finishes. And instead, when we're in finishes, we're just continuing to get all the utilities, the meters in, and get this project completed. So why do so many home builders make this mistake, and how can you avoid it? I think what happens is that they're too focused, like I've said, on moving quickly. They're not focused as much on the thoroughness of the design and the layout early on. What they do is they get through framing and then they do the design of that room. Instead, do it right up front, lay everything out, spend the time at the office, spend time at the at the boardroom meetings, and spend the time laying out exactly what you want to execute out in the field before it gets time. It's a huge game changer, especially because it also indirectly forces you to improve process and structure. Because order of operations is everything in construction. In home building, it's all about the order of operations, what goes in first, what goes in next, which walls need to be allocated for what. Without getting into detail, it's very much an order of operations business rather than a complexity. It's just a lot of moving parts. And so if you were to find yourself spending all of that time at the beginning, what you'll realize is it'll be a game changer, because once you're in the field and you're on site, you already know exactly what you want to construct. And so how does this rank with other things on our to-do list as home builders? I think it's pretty high up there. I think first and foremost, tracking the budget is still the main focus. But secondarily is the execution in the field. And I think it's one of the highest things on execution in the field, specifically with rough-in, so that you can, insulate and drywall and then get into finishes. But also just, in practice, it's continuing to force structure and process and organization, optimization. And what you'll find is it'll also become favorable in other areas. Without getting into detail, an example might be, with exterior materials, there's a lot of the exterior facade in a home. We don't necessarily sheet it or put plywood or OSB along all of the walls. Oftentimes we'll even only do it on the load-bearing walls or the shear walls, as it's termed. But what we'll find is that after that, we'll have a bunch of exposed areas of the house that we're wanting to either lay stone or siding. It's a lot more beneficial to install that when there's backing, or that there's plywood or OSB on the wall. And so if you already know what areas you're going to have certain exterior materials, when you're in frame, then you can make sure that you sheet that side. And by doing this, it can improve other aspects of our to-do list, our punch list as home builders, because again, it's forcing us to stay in process and organization and continuing. What we've found is by spending that extra attention early on, it opens the door to potential issues that we catch early rather than out in the field. Because by taking that extra measure, we notice this, that, or the other that needs to be resolved as well. And in the past, we've had to realize that on the spot. And now, being proactive, we're able to further evaluate the scope and then also see what obstacles that uncovers and address those as well prior to construction. And then when you're in construction, it's a full game changer, because once we're in construction, everything's done. I mean, the house was already built on a computer in the office, and now we're just executing on it, rather than getting the paperwork necessary to start construction and then figuring it out during construction. Obviously, you recognize in theory that the former is such a more efficient and effective way to build a home. So we came to this realization just a few years ago, and we've been implementing it ever since. And I don't think that we would be as far along had we not. It's also encouraged us to further our computer software to be organized and efficient. And yeah, I mean, it's allowed us to expand exponentially, because without proper and efficient, succinct, process and structure, there's no way we would have been able to absorb the workload that we're currently building out. And it's just continue to improve. When we bring new staff members in, here's our process, here's what we do, and this is how we do it. And it's allowed us to have sort of that blueprint, or that real structure, so somebody can come in, and it's allowed us to be scalable. I hope you found this information valuable and useful, and I hope that you can implement it into your own projects and into your own field. So if you want to stay up to date with our current projects, please go to our YouTube profile page, and it'll have our Instagram. It is Revere Real Estate, REVERE Real Estate.